Sister Aneeqah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Shukran so much for inviting me. This is very exciting.
Life finds a way. It definitely
Yes,
finds a way.
yes,
When it's
definitely.
meant to be, then it certainly is, inshallah. First and foremost, Sister Anika, as you mentioned, or as you heard, and we've spoken about this off air as well, it's so important to sometimes just pause and just stop, because in this rat race of life, we speak about that often, and we said it could be so many things, especially when we come to this time of the year. It's businesses that start to get a bit crazy towards year end, work pressure, people, and also personal pressure now, because wives or families want to go away on holiday. You start to look at your budget a little more. You feel envious, you're looking towards others. What are some of the pressures you would say now are associated when it comes to this time of year, family systems and structures as a whole?
It's very interesting, but it really truly is. Even in the counseling world, you'll notice an influx of need. People saying, my teenager is in matric, my high school teenager, my child. People are looking at next year, for example. They're starting to feel anxious. They don't know where they are. Are they going to be stable in the coming year? What it has to hold. And so as we come towards the end of the year, we sort of almost automatically start taking account of what has this year been about for me? Am I a failure? You start
Mm.
asking questions. Have I achieved what I set out? Were my goals realistic? Where do I see myself next year? And so it's also a good thing. It's a good thing to take some time and be like, where am I now?
It is very important. And now, when you mention the goals, where I need to be, to many people, I'm at the same place where I was last year. I haven't done anything. I haven't grown. There's also the syndrome, and I think it's happening more and more with men or with people that somehow feel they haven't grown in their careers, or they haven't been able to do enough or provide enough. Is that something that isn't spoken about enough in this day and age as well? The pressure on our male counterparts.
Oh, definitely. I mean, obviously, there's been a rise and an influx of awareness around women's issues, which is amazing, alhamdulillah. But we should actually be looking at ourselves as a family unit, you know,
Okay.
and the husband, the father is involved in that, the children are involved in that, the mother is involved in that, the society is involved in that. And when we focus on something like women, for example, we necessarily leave out the other aspects, like the husband, like the father, like the children. But what I also wanted to speak about, Salma, is when we measure ourselves, I want to
Hmm.
take a moment to look at the measuring sticks that we do use to make ourselves feel like failures and ask ourselves, are we looking at ourselves holistically? If I didn't get that promotion at work, have I been doing other things? Have I been caring for the kids? Have I been breastfeeding? Have I been more present at home? Have I been looking after a sick family member, or at least being there for someone that struggles? And so I think one of the first things, you talk about the checklist, but we should really check our own measuring sticks for our wellness, because modern society gives us a prescription. Are you getting an A?
Hmm.
Are you winning the race? Have you got a new car or a cell phone or whatever the case may be? And so we measure ourselves in a very limited space. Now, I want us to first assess our own measuring sticks and be like, is it fair? Are we being fair to ourselves and our family members?
Oh, I think that's so important. Like you're saying, sometimes you're so busy looking at what you haven't achieved that you're not looking at, you've got a healthy family, you've got food on the table, you've got a wonderful home, you've got your health as well. But let's look at some of the things. And I went through your social media. It was so informative to go through that today. And you spoke about how counseling is needed now more than ever. You also referred to the pandemic of disconnect. I love that. I love how what that's done to family structures as a whole. How do you think families can assess each other from that perspective as well? If you were to do like a checklist now to the average family, what is the disconnect about, and why is assessing ourselves important, like you said?
I think, first of all, we need to really make time for such a check in. because society is such and our lives are as such that we don't really have time. So, for example, the basic housekeeping functions in our bodies, let's start there. Do a physical check in. Pause after Fajr or at the time of day that suits you. Pause and actually ask yourself, what is happening with my body in terms of sleep, in terms of eating and appetite, in terms of bowel movement, basic housekeeping functions first, right? Because without that, we cannot achieve health and wellness in other areas. And then ask yourself those questions for your children, for your family members. What are they looking like? Are they tired? Are they sleeping well? Are they spending too much time on a screen and so it's affecting their sleep, for example, whether it's for school or not for school? You know, things like that, I would say, ask yourself first. Do a physical check in because it's the easiest to recognize. You can maybe then recognize tension in your lower back or your shoulders. You can recognize a dull headache that you're having constantly. And so then we start to answer the question, no, I am not well physically. How can I become well? What more do I need? Is it sleep? Is it appetite? Is it my diet? you know and then from there we build more on the emotional, relational, spiritual side of things, because without the physical, are we able to get to the emotional and the relational? Am I feeling frazzled and disconnected and irritable all the time? Am I so irritable that I can't really connect to my children or my husband because they're irritating me so much? you know that irritability stops us from being able to connect. But now, instead of judging yourself for being irritable, ask yourself, why am I feeling irritable all the time? Is my life overwhelming? Is it constant traffic? Is it financial stress? And then give yourself the space to first be self compassionate. Okay. To find out, where am I? What do I need? And from that space, we can then start to connect to others around us.
Oh, that's so beautiful. That's really so important. So, what would you say now if you were speaking to somebody, or if you notice certain things people may be putting out on their social media or over the table, having conversation, that you would say are subtle, if you could call it warning signs or trigger points, a little bit of red flags, but not in a negative sense, but more as this person is potentially close to having a nervous breakdown or having burnout. I know somebody recently very close to me who succumbed to it eventually, and he's young, and because of work pressure, he inevitably could not handle it and he broke. And I think that it's something that needs to be discussed, and we need to be able to monitor ourselves. What would be the signs for you that a person needs to recognize and say, hey, you're now in a red zone, now you are now in a danger zone, before something actually happens or before you cause problems in your own lives?
I would say I would say we should make it a practice to do things that incorporate wellness before problems occur. So, for example, in the family, we should have the check in at the supper table, for example. How are you? How are you really feeling? You seem to be a bit distracted. What's happening for you? How are you eating? And notice things about each other and ourselves. And it's difficult for outsiders to notice, but the closest people to you will know that you're not sleeping well, for example. You haven't been sleeping well for weeks. Maybe you're upping your sleeping medication. Maybe you're taking Panados to sleep at night. So little signs and symptoms that have to do with sleep, with eating, with mood. Again, those basic housekeeping functions that seem to be going out of whack a little bit. But even before that, like I say, start to implement, maybe after Fajr or after Maghrib, that routine of the check-in, of becoming self-aware, because it's really difficult for us. In the beginning, we're like, I don't actually know how I feel, right? I don't. I'm just like this. But eventually, with practice, you'll start to say, like, I feel quite tight chested, I've noticed. And it's
Hmm.
happening pretty often. And before, maybe you didn't notice something like that. But the more somebody actually asks or takes an interest, you'll be like, I do have a dull ache in my lower back. It's been happening for a couple of weeks. I have been ignoring it. Or my bowel movements have not been regular. I've also been ignoring it. So let's check in with each other and stop ignoring these signs and symptoms that aren't actually rocket science things. If we
Yeah.
give ourselves the space to take note of it, it will become quite obvious. And, in Islam, for example, from 1,500 years ago, we are supposed to be engaging in the daily practice of self awareness. Where am I? What state am I in spiritually? What state am I in with my spouse, with my children, with my body, etc.? And the more we make this a norm within our homes, the more we will avoid catastrophic issues down the line.
Fantastic. In closing, you touched on it briefly now, but just very quickly to explain that aspect of muhasaba, you talk about it on your profiles as well, just to give our listeners something to take away from. How can they engage in a muhasaba in a practical sense with just about a minute or 2 minutes to go?
Well, muhasaba is looking at yourself. It's the act of introspection. And Hassan al-Basri said that the eye of the believer is turned inward. And so now we are often looking at what's happening on the outside. I would say take some time in your daily routine, whether it's after Fajr, whether it's after Maghrib, 5 minutes, and do a check-in. Ask yourself the question, where am I spiritually? Where am I in my relationships, etc.? And that little practice will grow. It will grow in your self-awareness, and you'll just also feel like, instead of feeling like a failure on the outside, perhaps you've made steps towards your own health within your own family and within yourself. And carries you through.
Definitely. Beautifully put there. It was wonderful having a conversation with you today. And I hope and pray we get to do this again, inshallah. Maybe perhaps make it a more frequent thing. It was very inspiring and I look forward to it. I love life in a way to just, you meet people randomly and sometimes life just finds a way when you're meant to have somebody. It was wonderful speaking to you, Sister Aneeqah. And stay blessed, inshallah, and stay well. And we will speak again soon. Shukran.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.